For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Healing Hearts. I'm Tracy Koga. Well, we all know we're heading into a federal election come September 20th. And so by now we should see a sea of lawn signs with people advertising and spreading the word on who they want to vote for. But here in Winnipeg, we see more signs saying, "Stop Bill 64, don't vote for Bill 64, and my favorite, slam the door on 64. So what is Bill 64? Well, it happens to be a very controversial education bill that will be a game changer for education here in Manitoba. So tonight we'll discuss how Bill 64 will affect Indigenous and newcomer communities. This is Healing Hearts. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing Hearts, and I just want to say before I welcome the guests, thank you very much to our brand new sponsor, the Hive Climbing and Fitness Winnipeg. They're a rock climbing facility, and what a great way to get some exercise. So thank you once again to the Hive. Now welcome to all of my guests. We've got a great panel here, and I just want to say thank you very much to Nathan Martindale, Vice President of Manitoba Teachers Society. And I know, Nathan, your time is precious and you do have to leave early, but we'll get right down into what Bill 64 is all about. And I want to welcome Jamie Bunyas from IPW. You're going to give us a parent point of view, I think, on this whole bill. And of course, we have the lovely Perla Havate and all of your many years in the education system. We really want to find out how the newcomer communities are going to be affected by Bill 64. And definitely last but not least, our friendly and wonderful Clayton Sandy, knowledge keeper. Clayton, you're going to give us your views, all the many years that you've been in the education system and what Bill 64 is all about. And I will also bring in a special guest, but we'll be reading his notes, and that's John Weems. And he's a former Dean of the Faculty of Education for the University of Manitoba and a lifelong educator. So now we have all of our guests. I'm going to go to Nathan. Let's get right down to it. For those that are, their kids aren't in the school system anymore, or, they don't really care what is Bill 64, what is it exactly and how it can possibly affect all of us?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm more than happy to attend tonight and give a brief overview on Bill 64 and why the Manitoba Teachers Society is speaking out against this regressive education reform. So Bill 64 is formally titled the Education Modernization Act. And it introduces a new model of governance for public education in Manitoba. And this enables the provincial government to enact some of the recommendations from the K-12 education review that was initiated 2 years ago. Now, it's important to note here that only some of the recommendations from that review are making it into the legislation, and the Manitoba Teachers Society is disappointed that a lot of things are missing. And when we made our submission, which seems like 5 years ago, but it was only about 2 years ago, the top 3 of our recommendations had to do with child poverty. And we're very disappointed that this legislation does not do anything to address the problem of child poverty in Manitoba. And this is important because we know that if children are going to school hungry, they cannot learn. So the basic needs have to be met first. We asked the government to put something to consider meal programs, whether that's breakfast and or lunch, and there has not been a firm commitment to that, and that's just one problem. We have many concerns, but we like to point that one out first because this government needs to solve and actually work on the child poverty problem in Manitoba. We also strongly believe that the bill does not do anything to improve learning conditions for Manitoba students. This is about partisan politics, not education reform. Bill 64 centralizes the government control over public education. So how does it do that? It dissolves the 37 English school divisions across Manitoba and establishes a centralized provincial education authority. And this has an impact on public education. It reduces the government accountability and transparency. And one of the ways it does that is by eliminating the local voice. So right now, there are elected school boards, adults of voting age and who reside in the specific school divisions can vote for school trustees, and those school trustees make decisions at the local level that are in the best interests of their community. And the system has served its purpose well, especially how it connects to parents. Right now, there are parents, they have the ability to pick up the phone and call their locally elected school trustee or email their locally elected school trustee, and there's a connection to the community. These could be parents who run for these positions. They could be business owners, but they're well known, and the law dictates that they must reside in the division that they run in. So that serves as a connection between that elected school board decision-making body and the voters, the parents, the taxpayers, the homeowners that elect them. That system is going to be eliminated, and there's going to be no more school divisions, but rather mega regions that are vastly different in size. And that's another problem with this Bill 64. Specifically for Winnipeg, in the new system, there'll be one representative on a provincial advisory council representing 100,000 students in the city of Winnipeg. And there's other rural mega regions, which are actually smaller regions, with that same one voice, but only having, say, 20,000 or 15,000 students. So not only is it inequitable in terms of the way that they've arranged these regions, but it also puts certain parts and certain populations at a disadvantage in Winnipeg. If you look at the statistics from Manitoba or Stats Canada, we know that the majority of Indigenous people in Manitoba live in Winnipeg. And if only one person is speaking for everyone in that mega region, right there, they're at a disadvantage. There's not going to be what we have right now is that local voice. And it's not just about the school division itself, but the programs that school divisions run. I was a teacher in the Winnipeg School Division, and it is very proud, and I am very proud of all the language programs that the Winnipeg School Division runs. I'm a graduate of the Ukrainian bilingual program in the Winnipeg School Division, and that's just one example, one language. There's Tagalog, there's Cree, there's Ojibwe, there's Hebrew. There's languages that need to be preserved, that parents were the impetus behind. They were the driving force behind creating these programs. They talked to the school trustees developed the policies. And it's important for these programs to continue. We all know the value of heritage languages and continuing those languages and traditions and customs. So there's a very real risk that with Bill 64 and this new system, that those smaller, more specialized programs can be lost when there's no one speaking up on behalf of those parents who feel strongly about that Ojibwe program or feel strongly about that Ukrainian program. My background is working with children with exceptional needs or special needs. That's another example of what has happened in the Winnipeg School Division in terms of robust programming for children with special needs. And that's based on parents advocating for their children, talking to school trustees, and school trustees ensuring that there's money set aside in budgets and programs in place to meet the needs of those exceptional students. Under Bill 64 and one big giant mega region of Winnipeg, I'm very scared, and MTS is very concerned that these programs they won't be given the priority that they need, and that these children will, it's a cliche, but fall through the cracks, and they won't have that one-on-one EA, or they won't have specialized programming that they so desperately and by law need. Those are just two examples of specialized and diverse programming that could possibly be lost under this new system. the Bill 64, once again, isn't about students or learning. It's about power and control. A lot of the bill, it's a very large document. I've read through it a couple times, and each time I read through it, there's something new that jumps out at me and that gives me great concern. There's a lot of power that is given to the Minister of Education in this bill, and that's scary because with the stroke of a pen or a decision by cabinet or the premier, big decisions can be made that affect the whole province, and I guarantee you they won't care about the little school I went on a tour of schools last year, and I went to the most southwestern school in Manitoba, and it had a principal and a teacher and 13 kids. Under Bill 64, the provincial government is not going to care about these kids and that school because they're going to make such large-scale decisions. Whereas right now, the local school division in that corner of the province does value that school. The schools are almost always in rural Manitoba the central heart of the community. The teachers are involved in the community, whether it's sports teams or other activities. And while the government promises that no schools will be closed as a result of this bill, I don't believe that. I think there is a risk of smaller schools, both in rural and northern, and even in Winnipeg, being closed because it's just easier. They'll see that as an easy way to save money and ship those kids, they'll have to get on a bus and go sometimes for 2 hours in rural Manitoba. This presentation, I could do an hour presentation on the concerns with Bill 64, but I don't want to take up all of the time. There is, what we've seen in the last year is the uptake, and you mentioned it in the top of the show, all the signs. You go down a street and you see signs from a political party or the Manitoba School Boards Association. And I'm happy your favorite sign is the Manitoba Teachers Society, slam the door on Bill 64. And we want people to know that we're not done with our campaign opposing Bill 64. We're actually ramping it up in the fall. And tomorrow we're launching a TV commercial that's going to be played on various mediums, TV, internet, as well as radio commercials. We're going to flood the airwaves with Slam the Door on Bill 64 so that there won't be any conservative MLAs left speaking for this bill. And you've seen already, very recently in Manitoba politics, the leadership race to replace Brian Pallister, and Heather Stephenson was the first one to say that the bill is done. And I had the chance to do some media last week, and I said, well, that's not good enough. We don't, she's just an individual running to replace Brian Pallister. We need the government to say Bill 64 is done. So we're not going to stop until Cliff Cullen, the Minister of Education, or Brian Pallister, who's still currently the Premier, formally withdraws Bill 64 from the order paper. Then and only then will we declare victory. We're still encouraging folks to sign up to speak at committee. Manitoba is only one of 2 provinces in Canada that by law, as the bill winds its way through the legislative mechanisms and steps, has to have a committee made up of MLAs from all 3 parties, and presentations can be made. And so we've already set a record. Over 510 people have signed up to speak, and we're guessing against Bill 64 because many of them we know people on that list are from MTS or local teachers associations, concerned parents, concerned school trustees, NDP and Liberal MLAs. And we want to increase that list and really show the government that there is no way that anybody in this province is in favor of the bill. And I think that really, when Heather Stephenson says that the bill is done, and even today on the radio, Shelley Glover is indicating she's running for the PC leadership, and she doesn't want the bill to go through either. So the fight is not over. It's important that this bill be pulled, as I mentioned, because it doesn't serve students, and it actually does a disservice to the Indigenous populations and other persons of color in Manitoba. But I know other people are going to touch on that. But that is something that we were really disappointed when the recommendations came out that the province, and this isn't a surprise, but the province wants again, not only does it not do anything to address child poverty, but the K-12 Ed Review barely mentioned anything about Indigenous education as well. And that's deeply disappointing, but not surprising by this government. So I get all fired up when I'm talking about this and doing these presentations.
No,
I'll stop there and take a sip of water. If there's any questions that you might have.
Yeah, do anybody here, this is your time, because unfortunately Nathan has to leave. Clayton, Perla, Jamie.
I actually have a question. It is something that I have to admit I don't know very much about the bill altogether, like as a whole. I've seen a lot of presentations on it. I have not read through it. But there is one part of the bill that concerns me as a parent that I have been curious about and never actually gotten more information, no matter who I ask. So don't worry if you don't have the answer to this question, because there may not actually be an answer to this question. But at one point, it mentions being the ability for the province to remove sensitive or possibly triggering information from the education system. And as an Indigenous parent, well, when I was a kid, I had no idea what residential schools were. And the first time that I had ever heard about them was when my daughter came home with a graphic novel called Sugar Falls, which was beautiful, by the way. Powerful, but beautiful. But one thing that always, like, what does that mean to remove sensitive or potentially triggering information from the curriculum?
It's a great question. I can take a little bit of an answer, but it's absolutely a concern that MTS has and that we have talked about, because it's not only issues like reconciliation and Indigenous Canadians, but also other sensitive topics, healthy sexuality, substance abuse. There's a long list of what we think sensitive issues are. And once again, this is partisan politics coming to play in the education system. And part of our lines, or what you'll see in the media, is we need to keep politics out of the classroom. So we know that there is a large group of conservatives and citizens in Manitoba who don't want their children learning about reconciliation, Indigenous trauma from the past in Winnipeg, Canada. That's absolutely a part of our history. I didn't learn about that either, but I'm so proud that right now my children, I'm so happy my children are learning about that right now, but it should be all children. You know, if parents are opting out, or if the government is going to rewrite curriculum and take out sensitive topics, then all of our children are at risk. It's regressive. It goes back a generation to our generation where we didn't learn about it, and we're learning about it as adults. So I place a lot of faith and hope in the next generation of my students, of my daughter in grade 3 coming home and telling me all these things that I'm so happy that her school and her school division, Seven Oaks School Division, is putting on the curriculum and is teaching about. And we need that for all children in Manitoba, not just the children of parents who check off the box and say, yes, it's okay for my child to learn about residential schools. Every child in Manitoba needs to learn about residential schools, healthy sexuality. There's a long list. There's some big topics, but it's actually a long list. So that's absolutely a scary part of this bill, and another reason that we strongly oppose it and want to slam the door on Bill 64.
Clayton, if you want to jump in here, because you know you've spent so many years in the educational system, and what are your comments or thoughts on all of this and hearing Nathan's presentation?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Nathan for his presentation. It's really eye-opening, and there's pockets there that I never thought about. But yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I spent 40 years with the government, and probably 26 of those with education and training. And I think maybe just to answer Jamie's question, is sometimes government, they don't want to hear the truth sometimes, and sometimes the truth is very embarrassing, and somebody has to take the blame for that. So a lot of times, working in government, when we talked about the hard issues, and the hard issues were the poverty issues. Many times people around the table just didn't want to hear that stuff. And so I think in the late '80s, we were fighting a lot for having more Indigenous authors publishing books and documents, and to get into the system. And it was uphill battle, trying to get the system to accept the stories and the books that were coming from Native authors. Because I think, and when I grew up, and I think most of the authors that had anything to do on Indigenous history was a non-Native author. So I think that is basically part of it is basically hearing the truth. And many times the government has a difficult time, especially the conservative government, and hearing the truth, and nobody likes getting a finger pointed at them. But that's basically what would happen sometimes. So if they didn't want to hear what was going on, they would just shut it down and turn a blind eye to any kind of information that they felt that would hurt their children, or would traumatize a group of children, and they would just shut it off. So those are the things we fought for, and I'm glad that these things are getting into the curriculum system. And over my time, we had some really good ministers and deputy ministers that basically just they would accept information and deal with the truth. So part of that basically is dealing with the truth. And if 64 was about to happen, my concern was how do we select people to be on this super board? And my time in government, we always had a difficult time having parents engaging all the time in coming to school meetings and different things like that. And if we didn't have a school divisions and school boards to take up that fight, I wouldn't put my all my support in having one or two people appointed by government to oversee issues happening to that. And when that happens, when those things are taken away, it's always the people that are living in poverty that are hit the worst. And that cycle just continues with the parents and the children and the school system, and it just continues on. So again, we have to not be afraid to talk about the truth and to deal with issues. And so to me it's an individual thing, because I did work with many non-Native ministers on both parties, and some got it and some didn't, but the majority of them just didn't want to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. We do have a few questions from viewers, so I just want to, just before you go, so first question, what would be the best way for people to get their voice heard by their local representatives?
Well, local representatives is the key right there. MTS is also encouraging people not only to sign up to speak at committee, but also to write their local MLA, to write the premier, to write a letter to or email to the Minister of Education, to the opposition leaders. The more letters that MLAs get, the bigger an issue it is. I can guarantee you that hundreds and hundreds of letters have been already sent, but we want to keep that flood of letters up. I should point out that on our website, mdteach.org, there's a toolkit that has a lot of the things listed, not only the presentations and the letter writing, but other ways that parents, citizens, teachers can get involved. So please check out our website and look for the Bill 64 toolkit for more ideas. But contacting your elected representatives is absolutely a good idea.
And we're going to go back to now with the removal of the elected school trustees. I mean, the big thing for the bill was that they're going to be saving millions of dollars. So is it just going to be a financial bottom line, or is it going to be at the cost of the education and well-being of students?
Well, I think that answered the question right there. It will be not only of the well-being of students, but well-being of teachers and principals and parents and everybody in the public education system. It doesn't benefit the kids, and we always put the kids first. You know that teachers do that. Our members are very good about that. But this doesn't do anything to help other people within the educational system, teachers, principals, parents. So the only people that are benefiting is the government, and it's the sitting government right now that benefits power and control more power and control centralized with the minister and the current government, the PC government in Manitoba.
Perla, did you have a question for Nathan?
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to thank him because you made everything clear. I've been reading bits and pieces about Bill 64, but it doesn't take really a very intelligent person to grasp what it is all about. When I heard about it right away, the thing that came to mind is what's going to happen to our kids, because it's not about our children, it's more about governance, and that's putting power again to just a limited few. As it is, our educational system is not perfect. Okay, there's a lot of things that we can improve on, but to do it this way is wrong. It's just going to put everything upside down, make everybody really anxious about this change, and in the process, our kids are left behind. And that's the thing. Where I'm coming from, because I work as community liaison officer for Winnipeg School Division, and my position was created in the 1980s precisely just to respond to the need of the influx of Filipino children. That's just one example of how our school divisions respond to specific needs. And Nathan has mentioned all the special programs that developed through the years, responding to the needs of our children. And it's been functioning well that way. And especially here in Winnipeg, in central Winnipeg, where there's a lot of needs. If this bill goes through, I'm afraid for our children. I'm really, really worried that they'll be left behind. The school board trustees, when I came, I was educated in the Philippines. Okay, so I was educated the traditional way. I learned how to read through phonetics and stuff like that. So when I came over, I was able to embrace the new system that we have here, including the school board and all that, because that was a new concept for me. Why are we having elected officers in the school system? Because electing people who don't even, who are not teachers, who don't know anything about education, and coming up with policies for our children. But I came to embrace it. But one thing I really like from the suggestion of the commission is that some are elected and also some are appointed to fill in some of the skill needs in that, in the board. And that is not reflected in Bill 64. It's just, putting power to a few.
Right.
And the control on the government.
Yes.
And that's politicizing our educational system.
No, thank you, Perla.
I have a quick question for Nathan.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nathan, how does the federal government play a role in what's happening in Manitoba, or do they?
Because education's a provincial responsibility, there's little to no role for the federal government, with of course the exception of funding to the First Nations schools, and that's a whole other problem and ongoing, and you could argue the lack of proper funding, the lack of attracting teachers, the lack of infrastructure. And that is something that, even though it's more of a federal in the federal realm, it's absolutely something that we talk about at MTS, because through our membership in the Canadian Teachers Federation, we do have ways to lobby the government, and CTF does that on behalf of the provinces and territories. But that's the only involvement. The only other involvement is, of course, everything is an exception in COVID. So there was money given by the federal Liberal government last spring that was supposed to be earmarked for COVID expenses. There wasn't a whole lot of detail. So back in the spring, MTS was pushing for the government to please spend this money, whether it's on hand sanitizer or more substitutes. You need to spend $85 million that Prime Minister Trudeau gave to Manitoba, and it was broken down per student. So the Winnipeg School Division was supposed to have the biggest chunk of that money. And of course, when you get into levels of government, we don't even know if all of that money was spent. But that was another federal example.
Wow.
Okay.
Our last question, I guess, for you, Nathan. Is there anything in the bill that you approve of?
Well, we always try to give credit where credit is due. It's really easy to pick out all of the bad things, because generally speaking, it's all bad. And I don't have, it's a 364-page document. It's this thick. So, you know, we have our list of concerns. That's also on the website. And the problem is there were things in the recommendations that the K-12 Commission made that we agreed with. There was some good things in there. The problem is the government totally spent that money and tossed that report aside. So it's really too bad that there wasn't more from those recommendations put into the legislation. And then I could list some good things, but right now I can't, because it's important to toss this bill. We don't want to see it amended. We don't want to see it watered down. We want to see it gone.
Wow. Well, I don't know if you can stay a little bit longer. I just wanted to share John Ween's opinion. It's in Bill 64's response to Indigenous and newcomer education, and very strongly at the front. Neither Indigenous education and newcomer education are prioritized, largely ignored or treated as an afterthought with conventional but wrong assumptions regarding both when they are mentioned. Although there is talk of consultation and working together, the people actually affected or involved are rarely acknowledged nor room made for their involvement. So that's pretty strong. He goes on with some, and it separates Indigenous education and newcomer education. If you want to hear these points, I can read them out. It's his concerns. So here's what Bill 64 is offering for Indigenous education. Indigenous education is consistently talked about in deficit terms. Closing achievement gaps in science, calculus, and technical education. Improving graduation rates without evidence as to viability through removing of local control, training and supervising teachers, curricula for Indigenous students on Indigenous issues, no outright mention or recognition of the contributions of Indigenous learnings, teachings, and ways of life to other students. Only a strategy, principles responsible for this being done. Including education about treaties, history, as if there is one Indigenous history, and residential schools without any rationale or details provided for any of the above. Promise to collaborate with First Nations partners, Métis, Inuit not mentioned, for federal versus provincial responsibilities, but otherwise rely on the Aboriginal Directorate and a newly imagined Indigenous Inclusion Directorate Advisory Council. Makes inclusion sound a little bit like assimilation to John. Promise an elders and knowledge keepers in schools initiative, as if this is new. Many school divisions introduced these as much as a decade ago. And finally, a hint at a need for teachers for rural and northern communities with no further action suggested. And he makes a note here. Free Press writer Negan Sinclair has especially and repeatedly warned that the centralized control under a provincial education authority sounds a lot like the front runner to the residential school system. So obviously he has some strong words.
I'll say two things, and I do have to excuse myself. And I think it's important to hear the voices of Jamie and Clayton and Perla. I'm obviously a settler. I'm not ever one to speak on behalf of any other groups. I'm only representing MTS. I will say that yesterday we had all of the local presidents from across MTS gather for training along with our provincial executive. And we had 3 keynote speakers, and the one keynote speaker that completely blew us away and gave us a lot to think about, but not only think about, but act upon, was Nigan Sinclair. He, my notes are chicken scratches, but I was trying to capture everything that he was saying. And Dr. Weens mentioned a couple of things that what the government is trying to do it's backwards. It's a step backwards. It's not forward thinking. The one quote that I did remember from yesterday, I'm getting old. I can't remember everything. It drives Karen crazy. But Indigenous education is education for all. So the government wants to compartmentalize and put Indigenous education in this little box over here and then check it off and say we did it. We consulted, we did this, we're doing great. But it's not that simple. It needs to be, as I mentioned before, all children learning, all teachers teaching, the acceptance of all ideas, and not just the same old white colonial teachings that have permeated the education system in all of North America for 200 years. So those are my thoughts on that. I want to leave space for others to speak. I would love to come back and participate more, but it's almost 7:40, so I'm going to say my goodbyes, and maybe one day we'll again be in a virtual room together.
Oh my goodness, yes, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. Yes, and we'll get those letters started up and sending them to you too.
Yes, please do. Thank you very much. It was nice to meet everyone. Thank you for the time.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Jamie, what did you think of John's, like, I was reading these notes and I'm going, I wish you could be here to, but it's, yeah.
Well, actually, I kind of wanted to say this a little bit earlier in the episode, but we were focusing on Nathan's presentation, so politely waiting my turn. But I know you introduced me as Jamie from Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. I feel like this type of conversation is a little controversial, so I just want to take that step back and kind of disassociate myself and make the statement that I am here as a parent, as an Indigenous woman, not as a representative of the organization. And then that way, if I do say anything particularly controversial, everyone knows these are my own views and not anybody else's.
We'll put a disclaimer when you're talking.
Yes, that's my official disclaimer.
Yes, and I did say you're going to be representing as a parent and learning all about this, and you've got a young daughter, and you know
I actually have 3 children.
Oh.
So my children are 11, 15, and 20.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and so one of the things when Nathan was talking about his presentation is that the government of Manitoba did not put into this bill anything about child poverty, and they did not do any of the recommendations with child poverty, and that actually is something that is very, very close to my heart. I am a very big advocate against socioeconomic discrimination. So my son is 20 because I had him when I was very young. And so I was a low-income, Indigenous, single mother, 22 years old, trying to join the Parents Association at my school. Didn't go out so well, did not feel so welcome. But it's... My number one thoughts about this bill is honestly that the bill itself is ridiculous. Everything in it is just so over the top ridiculous in how limiting this will be for the voices at the table and how centralized this will be for the voices at the table. And as I said, being 22 years old and trying to go walk into a parents association meeting at my school, I know that's not my voice coming out of that parents association. I am the only person there that is that young. I am the only person there that has that little time because I'm working so often. I'm the only person there that has that little money because I don't have a university degree. I'm the only person there that looks the way that I do. And I know that the voice coming out of that room is not going to be my voice. And so when they're making this few voices going to the table, I know that's not going to be my voice. And I know it's not going to be my daughter's voice or my son's voice or any voice of any person who knows what I go through or what my children go through. What really, really scares me about this bill is it scares me that the bill is going to not pass and everyone is going to pat themselves on the back and say, we really dodged a bullet there. Thank goodness that didn't go through. And then we're all going to breathe a collective sigh of relief and we're going to go home. And the voice coming out of that room still isn't going to be my voice. And it's still not going to be my daughter's voice. And I maybe kind of stepping out on a limb there, but I'm going to venture that it's probably not going to be Perla's voice either. And it's probably not going to be Clayton's voice either, because I really feel like it never really was. So yeah, that's my opinion of this bill. I think the bill is just so ridiculous.
Well, I mean, even that we're even talking about it, it is baffling to me. But Perla, and then I'm going to get to Clayton. John made his notes on newcomer education, so I just wanted to share these with you. Newcomer education is basically seen as a continuation and a refining of EAL, as if language is the only issue, resulting in very little of anything else other than minor tinkering with definitions and curricula. Promise a review of EAL designations and graduation requirements with no rationale or details. Will include EAL and newcomer perspectives in curricula. No mention of when, where, or why, and no acknowledgement of the complexities, for example, geographic locations of need, diverse groups, past newcomer experiences, refugees, war displaced and others, and immigrant differences and the like of newcomer education. Finally, suggest additional EAL training for new and beginning teachers in the first 5 years of their careers. So
that's going on now in Winnipeg 1. That's been going on for years, since I've worked with them for 35 years, and year after year it's been improving in terms of responding to needs. For instance, now that there's been an influx of kids coming from Africa and the Middle East, even the job that I was doing, they had to adjust it. It became intercultural support workers so that we can give assistance to these children who are coming from different countries. And it's not just EAL, especially if you consider refugees who are coming. You're talking about literacy, problems about literacy, and mastering the skills, math, and the different areas, courses that they have to take. But to start with, it's the biggest concern is the literacy one before they even start, going into EAL. And, as inefficient as it's probably not sufficient, but you see the schools trying to respond to these needs. And also what Jamie was saying about parent councils, I can understand that, because that's one of the things that I was doing. I was working with parent councils, and one thing I've been doing in the school where I was based was to bring in representatives from different cultural groups and making sure that they are actively participating. So these are, if they can just multiply all these efforts being done, then we should be fine. But it's true that in a lot of ways, they just sort of make an appearance, for instance, that it's being done, but it's not. So it's not a reflection of things that the parents of the local school are actually going through and what they want to share.
Well, it really doesn't sound like this Bill 64 is really paying any attention. Clayton, your thoughts?
Well, I think that things do change, but it changes when our community gets very active and works together. I think I'll use the example of Children of the Earth School in Nichimakwa. I remember in the 80s when that first came to an idea in our community. I remember there's about 10 of us going to the Winnipeg School Division board meeting and fighting and wanting Children of the Earth School. And I don't know how many times we went there and presented and fought, but eventually we got it. And I remember one particular night I spoke there, and so did another friend of mine, Dan Highway, about the importance of having Indigenous run schools. And they were trying to give us the school underneath the Disraeli Bridge at that time to be Children of the Earth School, but we wanted the location it has now. And I remember going there, and I made my presentation. So did Dan. And in those days, everybody was still smoking, so they had a smoke break. So I remember going outside for a smoke break, and I remember the non-native teachers that were there were standing outside, and they're calling us down, swearing at us because we were displacing them. And because they would have had, because they had to go someplace, and I remember that them swearing at us, and after the break, I remember we went back into the division, and division made the decision at that time to go ahead and give us Children of the Earth School in Nichimakwa, that playground there. So I remember, yeah. So we got that, but it takes our own community getting together and standing under one umbrella to make change. And even though it's not our voice, but we do have allies in governments also too that support us, but we just have to find them and educate them. And I find that's one of the biggest struggles I felt when I worked in different government departments, was that majority of the non-native people that I interacted with had no education about our history and about anything. And they're always afraid to talk to us and ask us questions. And until we actually spend time with them and educate them properly, they don't know what they're supporting sometimes. So really they never do nothing. So yeah, either an NDP and conservative government, I was able to educate people in both parties, and many times I got lots of support, but it was always just from individuals, and the majority of them didn't. Sometimes I felt that they didn't care if our education was in the system, as long as they're in control and nothing was changing. So those are the kind of things that I felt that when I looked at the bill also too, just to eradicate all these divisions and all the divisions that I worked with in Manitoba, there are some really good people in all those divisions, non-native people that fought for change also too for us. So I thought about all of those people getting a pink slip, and then who's going to replace that? We have to start all over again, educating people and hoping, having our fingers crossed, hoping the right non-native person gets into that position and has the sympathy and the empathy to understand our issues. But that's part of it is basically educating people about our history. So those are the kind of things that I always fought for, and tried my best to educate people from the inside. And I would get lambasted from a lot of my own people, basically saying that I sold out, and I've been working in government. But I always felt that if there's none of us working from the inside, how do we educate these people from the inside out? And
True.
so that's what I think I did best. Yeah, thank you.
Well, and I'm going to ask all of our panelists. I was looking through what John has given, and I'll read out later his general concerns. It's there has been no real talk about having more teachers that look like me, that look like Jamie, that look like Perla, that look like Clayton.
Yes.
And I think that would be so incredible for children to see that they could be that person. We've talked about this, about actors in Hollywood or musicians being on big stages and not seeing themselves and on TV. So why is it happening with education? Perla.
I think go ahead, Perla.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm retired now, but when I was working, I saw the efforts being done in Winnipeg One. Not enough, but you see the beginnings of equity. For instance, where in the school where I was, we had an Aboriginal principal. We had several Filipino teachers, and we had Aboriginal staff as well. But people are keep on coming in from other countries, and they need to be reflected in our school system because that helps our children. And I can say that with the Philippine students, where they see Filipino teachers, they feel good about themselves. And I know at one point I said, I was really glad that in the school where I was, at the end of the day, you can hear kids coming from different places, speaking their own language, laughing, and accepting each other. It's not like you have to speak English because, we're in school. It's an expectation. No, they can be themselves and will feel secure in who they are. So that would be ideal if we can replicate it in most schools. As Clayton said, that we have a lot of good, people in our school system, and we have schools that are running really well, but there are schools that also need improving.
Clayton, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add something, and this is something that I actually fought a lot of times when I worked in government in the early 70s, and we're talking like 50 years ago. We have a program in Brandon called BUNTEP. It's the Brandon University Native Teachers Education Program, and that program's been around for 50 years. So, and basically, it's to produce Native teachers in Manitoba. So we had thousands and thousands of teachers, qualified teachers, come out of that, but they couldn't find jobs. And in my time in education, superintendents have so much power, to hire who they want to hire, and HR is run by non-native people. So it's difficult for us, for many of those teachers, to actually get good quality jobs within the system. So I found that was a big factor. So the BUNTEP still runs, and I've often thought about creating a partnership, just to find those teachers and get them into the system. But again, the system has to change at the top all the time. I don't know if we have any in the superintendents, but there are divisions that I would work with when I was working, and there are teachers that would tell me privately that our superintendent has nothing to do about any kind of Indian culture coming into this school. So I heard that many times.
Wow. So Jamie, I do have a question, and I'm going to give it to you, just as a parent, and then Clayton and Perla can join in. So would you like to see a representative from each of the Indigenous and newcomer communities elected in each school division that were also elected representatives to sit on the school boards?
Okay, wait, can we say that again? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I know. I think the question is, would you like a representative from each of the Indigenous and newcomer communities that I guess are elected that are elected in each school division? They would be, would you like to see representatives on the school board that represent Indigenous and newcomer communities? Is basically, I think, what they're asking.
Yeah, I would love to see the school boards or the school council or whatever it is, it is that's making decisions about the school in general. And I mean, in general, the curriculum, who the teachers are, what the policies are, everything, every decision should be made by people who represent the people who are using the services.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I kind of feel, and maybe I'm just reading into this a little bit, but I feel like the way that that's worded is almost making it seem like it's impossible to do that. Because it's like, do you want representatives from every community? Well, no, you don't have to have representatives from every community at every table, but you need to have representatives from the communities that are expected to use those services at the table that's making the decision for them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a school in a little town in rural Manitoba and there are no Filipino people anywhere in this town, you don't need to have Filipino people on that school board.
Yeah.
But if half of the students at that school are Indigenous, then you
Mhm.
need to have an Indigenous representative.
Exactly.
And I think that should be true of everywhere, no matter where you are, and whether it's education or it's community services or anything. The people who are expected to be using the services should have representation, and they should have a voice at the table that decides how those services are made and given.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think Bill 64 reflects any of that. I'm just going to share with you some of these things and hear your comments. So John wraps up general concerns. There are general concerns with Bill 64 which do not bode well for Indigenous and newcomer education receiving the attention that they deserve. So one, he talks about centralizing all the educational authority in partisan government structures and frameworks, changing the role of the Department of Education to a policy oversight role as opposed to a service to teacher and schools role, parental involvement seen from the perspective of a working political, managerial, and educational knowledge of the school system, focus on results, not inputs, more reliance on expensive and more frequent standardized testing, usually biased towards the general majority dominant population as a measure of achievement and success. Focus on saving money rather than using it wisely for the good of all. For example, property tax refunds favor property owners as opposed to renters. More study on poverty education success relationship when we have known the answers for decades and need actions, not more studies. Focus on education for work preparation as opposed to education for participatory citizenship. That's interesting. In the appendices on lessons learned during COVID, there is no mention of Indigenous peoples or newcomers. For example, no acknowledgement that they might represent more vulnerable populations. And in addition, when the government began implementing BEST over the last 4 months or so, and to date, none of the Indigenous or newcomer initiatives listed were taken on. So all of those initiatives that I had read previously in the show, none of them have been taken on. And just for everyone's note, so Bill 64 is BEST. Better education starts today, putting students first. That is Bill.
Rude to laugh?
I was reading this before the show, and I'm going, I don't know if I should read this, but you know, this is John's opinions, but again, he's like Nathan, you know, a lifelong educator, a dean of the Faculty of Education, has probably taught a lot of the people that you, both of Clayton and Perla, know in the system. Mm-hmm. So Clayton, what are your views then, especially the real, like, not talking at all about Indigenous and newcomers?
Yeah, well, you know, when you mentioned that last sentence there, who in their right mind is going to say no? You know, the students aren't important. So a lot of times the voices, the people that the government is, you know, is preaching to is people who are upper class and have the means to, you know, for education and to, you know, to make sure their kids get the best education. But there's really nothing there to talk about the poverty and all the other underlining stuff. So basically, the people give the rubber stamp it, because you're not going to say no. This shouldn't be for the students. Of course, it should be for the students, but it's for students from one group only. And when you mentioned about having different people from different committees, it has to be more than one or two or three people on these committees, because you can't just put one Filipino or one black person or one indigenous person sitting around a table with 15, 20 non-native people and expect their voice to be heard, like Jamie had just said. So yeah, so I've always fought for, if your student population is 60% indigenous, you should have 60% indigenous teachers there, and you should have 60% parent committee members. So that's the way I always felt it out when I had a chance to say my 2 cents in government.
Wow. Perla?
Well, obviously, the most important factors that needed to be considered are not really important when it comes to this Bill 64. And we're really concerned about that. And in terms of having somebody being represented in the school board, I read something about the report of the commission where it said, because not everyone really is bent on running for office.
Mm-hmm.
So just to have some elected officers, but strategically to appoint, representatives from different communities, also considering the skills that they have to balance off what is needed to have the school board operate properly.
Mm-hmm.
That will give a chance to people who are not represented, population that's not represented, to come in. Mm-hmm. But that means whoever is in the position to appoint has to do it strategically, so that a population represented in the school division have representation in the board.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. And Jamie, and I'm kind of thinking about what you said, being afraid that, okay, the bill will not pass and people will be patting themselves on the shoulders, but it's going to rear again its ugly head in another shape or form. So, or do you think so? It's not.
It's not even necessarily that we'll end up with a new bill coming up later on that's going to have another similar thing. It's the way things are right now is not great. It definitely needs to get better, and we do need some sort of reform. I don't think we need this one, but we do need things to get better. And so that's kind of what I was talking about with, like, I don't want everybody to be like, the system that we have now is good because it could be worse. It
has to be better.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to work towards better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. Clayton, you got something to add?
Oh. No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm happy with everything. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, special thanks to Nathan and John Weens, too, as well, for his notes and comments. But I think, yeah, let's slam the door on Bill 64. I just like it because it's such a catchy phrase.
Can I say one last thing,
Oh,
Tracy?
you sure can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier. Actually, when you said property taxes, it's when this first occurred to me. But it was kind of running in my head when Clayton was speaking earlier as well. But I want to get out there. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are watching this show that are looking like me or sounding like me, or I'm saying things and they're like, oh man, yeah, I totally get that. Or when Clayton speaks, they hear and feel with him, or when Perla speaks, they hear and feel with her. But I'm sure that there is somebody that is watching this that is like, I don't have kids and I don't care. Why do I care about this? And maybe they're looking at it and they're like, hey, I could use a property tax rebate, or they're thinking about, and maybe it just doesn't occur to them why it's so important to know about this and why it's so important to think about this. So I want to say my children and you know, our children one day are going to run this city, and they're going to run this province, and they're going to run this country, and they're going to run the businesses, and they're going to run the schools. And right now, the people who are running the city and the province and the country and the schools and the businesses, those people grew up in a certain education system, being provided with certain ideas and certain information, and we are now all affected by the education that they received. And so it's important for you to care about this right now, because one day everyone in this country is going to be affected by the education that our children are receiving.
Yeah.
And on that note,
Yes.
but exactly, I think that was my opening question to Nathan. My kids aren't in the school system anymore, everything, so why should I care? And you came and it's brought it full circle, and that's so well said, Jamie. Yes, because it is our future, this is our country, and we all need to take a little bit of a look back and really start caring. So thank you so much to everyone, Jamie, Perla, Clayton, as always. It's been an honor and a pleasure. I know this conversation could go on, and maybe it will continue. We'll get Nathan back. Special thank you to Nathan Martindale and John Weens, and thank you so much, all of you out there, for joining us on Healing Hearts. Have a wonderful evening.